are you doing? Today is Monday, September 2nd, and I am back with another Quiltytube video. If you're brand new to my channel, welcome. My name is Olivia, and this is my YouTube channel, Pumpkin Hollow Quilts. I just want to start off today's video by saying a great big thank you to everybody who tuned in to the very first Quiltytube video that I put out about 4 weeks ago now. Definitely your enthusiasm for that video, as well as all the wonderful comments you left me, gave me the much needed courage to film today's video. So thank you so very much. For today's video, I thought it would be kind of fun to share and show those everyday quilts that get left out year round. These are ones that you will most often see in the background of photographs when I most especially am sharing my cross stitch progress finishes. There are also ones that if I, change out the seasonal decor, especially on the ladders or the quilt hangers, they're the ones that you most often will see in between holidays. They're some of my most favorite quilts. I just absolutely love them. They also, whenever the weather changes, it gets cold, they're the ones that we use to snuggle with on the couch, or if we need an extra quilt on the bed, we will generally use one of them. So they definitely get well used, well loved, well taken care of. The first quilt that will kick off today's video is the one hanging up behind me, and it is called the Spangled Quilt by Kim Deal. It's not the Spangled, it's just Spangled Quilt by Kim Deal. I made this one last year. My husband, he actually kitted it up for me before you could get the kits from the Fat Quarter Shop. I don't believe that you can get those kits anymore. I mean, this was last May, but so my husband and my children gave it to me for Mother's Day last year, and I had an absolute blast creating this quilt early in the summer. I believe I finished it last August, and I remember Allison and I went out into the field to take a picture of it. And as we were walking out to find the perfect spot to show it and take a picture of it, she had it wrapped around her, and I quickly took a picture of it, posted it on Instagram, and Kim Deal reposted that photograph. And I was just like in hog heaven. I could not believe that, she had done that. It was just so, so cool. But creating this quilt was a blast. The pattern came from the Fat Quarter Shop, and the fabric line it was created from is called Scraps of Kindness by Kim Deal. I absolutely loved making this quilt. My very good, wonderful quilty friend Retha also made the quilt, so we were kind of working on it together at the same time and finished pretty much around the same time. And it was such a blast. So many wonderful memories tied up in this quilt. I also feel like it is the perfect quilt as we transition from patriotic into a late summer. All of those wonderful jewel tone colors are just perfect for this time of the year, and I just absolutely love it. Every time I see it hanging up, it just makes me smile. The quilting motif was an all-over free motion swirl. I like this particular motif, and I have put it on a lot of my own quilts. I've also done various variations of it, just kind of whatever floats my boat at that moment. All in all, love this quilt, and if you are considering making it for yourself, I cannot recommend it enough. It's just a lot of fun. And again, you can find the pattern at the Fat Quarter Shop. Not sure about the fabric line. It did come out early last year, Scraps of Kindness. I'm sure you can find bits and pieces of it. The one thing I like about Kim Deal is a lot of her fabric lines are, I don't want to say similar, but they definitely play well together. So you could definitely search across the internet, your local quilt shop, and any fabric that you find that's Kim Deal, you could just begin gathering it and put it together, and it just plays so well with each other. So that's another option too if you're interested in putting this quilt together for yourself. And like all the quilts that I will talk about today, I will put them down in the description box, and if there are books or patterns available, I will put links for them. And I also will, if there's a fabric line, I will also make sure to put that information. But a lot of the quilts that I make tend to be a little scrappy, so I kind of use what's in my stash. So you know, it's kind of hard when it's a, scrappy fabrics and then somebody wants to know, what was the fabric line, and it's like, well, there's probably 100 fabric lines I used. So anyway, but any information that I can, I will leave it down below in the description box. The second quilt I want to talk about today is called Scrappy Celebrations, and it was designed by Lissa Alexander, and I apologize if I have mispronounced her first name. She designed it for American Patchwork and Quilting magazine, and they did it as a quilt along that started late February and concluded about mid-April. Lots of fun. They encourage you to use scraps from your stash. I can't remember how they broke it down, if they did each block individually and it was done every couple of weeks, or it was done weekly. I can't quite remember. When I started it, it was well into March, so I had a bit of catch up to do. But they did have it broken down. I don't remember how they did it. I'm not sure where the information originally was from, whether it was on Lissa Alexander's website or if it was on American Patchwork and Quilting website. But in order to participate, you did need to purchase the pattern beforehand. They did print the pattern in the February, or they always do it ahead of time. So I think the magazine came out in February, but it's always like several months ahead. So if it came out in February, it could have been like the April, May issue. I'm not sure how it breaks down. I used to subscribe to the magazine, and I remember I used to wait patiently for it to come out, and it was always published well ahead of time. But if you just look up Scrappy Celebrations, American Patchwork and Quilting, it should pop right up. It'll either be on their website, or then they have a separate website where you can then purchase patterns. And I'll put a link to both of them down below. But I had a blast creating this quilt. I know I say that a lot. And quite honestly, at this stage in my life, if I'm not enjoying something, I will abandon it. So I only try to work on quilts or work on projects that bring me joy. And this was one of them that definitely chased away those spring days when it's raining out and the weather's not the best. You can't really get outside and do anything. And it was just such a great end of winter, beginning of spring project. I did use scrappy fabrics from my stash, and how I determined what fabrics and colors to use were based on what colors that they had used for that particular block. So if it was a block that required reds and pinks and maybe a background of cream, that's how I determined what fabrics to go and pull. So it definitely gave me the opportunity to go through my fabric stash and play with a variety of fabrics. Some of the fabrics, because I had used them a lot in other quilts, I only had like little bits of it left. So those also were kind of factors when I was creating this quilt, using those little bits of other quilts to create this one, just because every time I look at it, I think about those other quilts and the fun I had making them. So it was just kind of a hodgepodge of different ways that I kind of approached the quilt when I was putting it together. The quilting motif that I used is one that I like to call ribbon. It is a free motion one. It's super easy. I start off by doing a large meandering, and then I shadow it. So it's really fun. It's one that plays well and with a lot of quilts if you're just not sure what to do. Sometimes I'll hook up a quilt and I just have absolutely no idea, because again, for me as a quilter, I like the quilt to tell the story and not my quilting. The third quilt that I have to share today is one that it probably gets used the most. If you come to the house, 9 times out of 10, it is thrown over the back of the couch. Pretty much every single morning I use this when I get up, especially now that the days are starting to get a little bit cooler in the morning. Definitely will use this as I wake up, drink coffee, and get ready for the day. It does not have a name. Back in 2020, my grandma and I did a shop hop. This would have been early March. It's the first time we'd done a shop hop in a couple of years. My grandma's not quilting as much, but we just decided to go and have fun. I pretty much had lost my quilting mojo and hadn't done any quilting for myself in probably a year, possibly 2 years. And I was just going to just to go with her. And that's when I started, seeing Civil War reproduction fabrics, and like I could feel the quilty bug coming back, and I started buying fabrics, and I had bought a kit. And we were at one of the very last stores on our way home, and they had these bundles of 2.5-inch Scrappy reproduction fabrics. I think you got 200 in a stack, and they were selling them for like $5, which I thought was a wonderful deal. So I bought 2 bundles of them. And then they just happened to have some Kim Deal fabric, and I bought a couple of yards of that. And I got home and I started assembling this quilt. And so this one is extra special because it just ignited that Civil War reproduction love that had been dormant for many years. And if you watch my last video, you know why. And so this quilt is the one that I 100% have to thank for that. I worked on it in those very early days of COVID when everything shut down. And I love this one so very much. It was super easy to put together. Again, I did not have any rhyme or reason, no name, no nothing. I just started piecing these 2.5-inch squares together, just sort of assembly line stitching. And I wanted, when I started off, I was just going to do a table topper. But then I found myself wanting to make a lap quilt. So I kept going, and before long I had one. I guess this is one that technically would be referred to as a utilitarian quilt because it does get used quite often. There's a lady that I used to quilt for, and she would always bring me these quilts that she made from scraps. She used to make a lot of charity quilts, and so these were the scraps from the charity quilts. And she used to call them utilitarian quilts because they used them everywhere. Anytime they needed a quilt, it was used. And so I feel like this one fits the bill for it. This one I decided to quilt very densely, which means that all of the motifs are really, really close together. There's a lot of them, so there's swirls and paisleys mixed together. It's probably my second or third favorite motif to use on a quilt because it's very forgiving. If you get yourself into a corner, you can very easily shadow your way out of it, and it's my universal motif. So I quilted it very densely. There's a lot of movement in the quilt, and I love it. I think it's been washed once, so it's nice and they call it crinkly, even though it's not crinkly, but it's just kind of like nice and soft, and it's a fun quilt, and I really enjoyed it. I have been kind of thinking about making it again, but doing it on the diagonal. There's a gal on Instagram, every once in a while, when she gets enough 2.5-inch squares together, she'll sew a couple of rows together. And I really like the look that it's now creating because I think she has over half of it done. And I'm kind of thinking about doing that. Even though they'll be very similar to each other, it'll be more scrappy because the backgrounds will be scrappy too. So definitely something that I'm thinking about doing possibly this winter, especially now that I've made a lot more quilts since this one was made. So I have a lot bigger scrap stash to work from. So it's definitely something that I've been thinking about doing, but no name for it, no link. If you are interested in it, pop me an email and I'll kind of give you, how many rows I have on it, as well as the overall dimensions of it, if you're interested in creating it for yourself. The next quilt that I have to talk about is called Carol's Churn quilt, and it is a pattern that is available on Quilt Expression's website as a PDF download, and I'll put a link to it down below. But this particular quilt I cannot take all the credit for. My friend Yvette started it. She got about 80-85% of the way through and decided that she did not want to continue working on it. So she sent me what she had done, and then I added the remaining blocks to it, and now I get to reap the rewards because I get to keep the quilt forever. I love this one. It is 100% scrappy. It makes me so happy every time I look at it. Earlier this year, I had it hanging up behind me, and anybody that came over was just transfixed by it. It's just a beautiful and spectacular quilt. Absolutely adore it. It also is very highly regarded by the Quilt Inspector General, who anytime I am moving it or refolding it, or for a while I had it on the couch, he loves it. It's his favorite quilt. So when it came time to do the long arm quilting on it, I decided to try my hand for a second time on doing feathers. And feathers is kind of one of those quilt motifs that I've always struggled with. For whatever reason, I can't get my brain to quite make it work perfectly. You see them a lot on quilts, especially when you go to quilt shows. It's a really popular motif to put on quilts. And for years, it's one I've struggled with. And then I just kind of happened on a YouTube channel where this long arm quilter was kind of breaking it down. They were using other motifs and mixing it together. So even though it was a feather motif, there were other, there was like leaves and swirls. And I'm like, well, I can do a swirl and I can do a funky leaf. So I kind of put them all together and I quilted a feather motif. So I got a good ways through, and then my quilt machine just stopped and I couldn't get it to turn on, couldn't get it to do anything. Thankfully, because it was a new motif that I was doing, I wasn't going like really fast, so it didn't rip the fabric, and it stopped with the needle up. So that was just so awesome that that happened. But then it ended up going in and I discovered it was the power box that had went out. In the meantime, while waiting for the quilt or the quilt machine, or to get word on the quilt machine's fate, I was so worried I was going to have to rip all of the stitches out because I had got a good ways through, and it would have taken me forever to rip the quilt out. So I was praying that my quilt machine could be saved because it's older. A lot of the parts, they don't make it anymore. And I mean, honestly, anytime I get all the way through a quilt, I give a prayer of thanksgiving. So I got the quilt back, was able to complete the quilt, and I like the motif. I mean, there's like 100 million mistakes on it. But with the combination of doing the sort of feather motif, adding swirls, adding those leaves, it makes it a little bit more forgiving. Definitely a motif that I would like to try again. There are a stack of quilts from me to quilt for myself, and I would like to try to do it where, because on this one it sort of goes straight across. There are some where I kind of made the motif serpentine a little bit, if that's the correct word, but I would like to get like more of curvature in the feather motif. So that's going to be kind of my next when it comes time to quilt my next quilt, that's the one that I will try to do, because I would like to get it to where I am doing the more traditional feather motif. And again, I don't have a computerized machine, so I have to do it all by my brain power. I have tried to do pantographs, but I think that my quilt machine is not level. And the garage, so it's in the pit of despair. It's basically the garage, and the garage floor slants a little bit. My husband built the table for it, but I think that it's sort of settled and it needs to be re-leveled. And then maybe I'll be able to do pantographs. I've dabbled in it a little bit. It's not perfect, but it is something that I would like to try to master. Anyway, but I will put a link to Carol's Churn Dash down below if you're all interested. Very, very scrap happy quilt. There are half square triangles in here. You do have to pay attention to the placement of the blocks because it does make that nice diamond motif, as you're assembling it. So you do kind of need to pay a bit of attention. I think when I was assembling it together, I had one of the blocks flipped the wrong way, so I had to go in and rip out a whole section, but it's fine. These next couple of 3 quilts are definitely high on my list of all-time favorite quilts. In fact, one of them is the top 5. And I am planning on doing a video where I show like my top 5 favorite quilts, but I'm going to do that later on, maybe early next year. But these quilts rank really, really high on my all-time favorite list of quilts. The first one comes from the book, The Civil War Diary Quilt. I cannot take credit for assembling any of the blocks in this quilt. My friend Carol Crago. So after I created my no name quilt, the one that's just the 2.5-inch squares, the one that reignited my Civil War reproduction love, her and Yvette were watching, I don't know if it was that video or was the next one that I had done, but they decided to send me fabrics. And this quilt was one of the ones that was sent. And so I got all of the blocks, and all I had to do was assemble it with the fabrics that she had included. And I had the absolute best time working on this quilt. I just loved all of the beautiful scrappy colors. I love it. And every time I look at it, it just makes me smile. So again, I cannot take credit for assembling any of the blocks. Carol did that. I do remember when this quilt came out. One of the quilt shops that I had went into on Shop Hop, whatever year that was, they were doing it, and I remember looking at all of the blocks. But again, there was that voice inside of my head that kept telling me that I should not be, playing with Civil War reproduction fabrics because that I was too young. And again, if you watch my first video, you know what I'm talking about. I wish I had. So the fact that I have this quilt now and I can remember seeing it and, remember loving it from a distance. And then she sent me every single block and I was able to assemble the quilt. I remember I did it over a weekend. I just started assembling. I was just so giddy with anticipation to get this quilt done so I could have it out. I rushed it through to quilt it so I could have it. I just was like so thrilled, and I absolutely love this quilt. 100% stays out year round. Last year I even had it with the Christmas quilts because depending on which way you fold it, there could be a block that has like greens and reds and and golds, and it just kind of fits in with some of the other quilts that I have. For the quilting motif, I used an all over meander. Again, I'm a simple girl, so I tend to like simple quilted finishes, and I felt like with the meandering I could allow the quilt blocks to tell their story. And it's just such a great quilt. There's so many memories wrapped up in this quilt, it's not even funny. During Ice-mageddon, when we had no power, no heat, no running water, this was one of the quilts that we used to keep warm. Yeah, I love it. I love it. I can't say it enough. I really don't have a quilt anymore that I don't love. Like any of the ones that I enjoyed and then it was like, well, this one's not really doing it for me anymore, I gave away. So the only ones I have are the ones that I love. So I feel like, I know I say that a lot, but I do love this quilt. It's so much fun, so beautiful, and I'm still so very blessed that Carol sent it to me, and I love it. So this next quilt is definitely top 5 favorite quilts of all time. And when I do make that top 5 or maybe even 10, I'm not really sure what I'm going to do. This quilt will definitely be one of them. But many moons ago, I challenged my quilt group to make this quilt. So this is the Farmer's Wife Sampler Quilt. And I wish I could remember what year it was. I know Allison was in middle school and Ethan was in elementary. But during this one summer, I challenged my quilt group to make this quilt. Just about everybody had the book, and it was one of those ones where they would talk about every now and again. And I ended up getting a copy of it somewhere. I think it was really cheap. It was on sale. It might have been from Joann's, and I had a gift card. So I picked up the book, and what I did was I took each block number, wrote it down, put it into a bucket, and then had Allison pull the order. So every week I would give my friends a list of the blocks that they needed to make. It was intense. I had no idea how much work went into this particular quilt, and I did that quilt in Halloween fabrics. So again, if I can find a picture of it, I will insert it. We had it on our bed for years and it finally started falling apart, which made me super sad. And at this point, it's probably going to have to become like a cutter quilt. But at the end of the summer, in October, the part of the challenge was if you could get it done by the Halloween party, which was the first year I hosted a Halloween party. So you had to come in costume, you had to bring the quilt, and then there'd be prizes for the quilts. So my quilt group really got into it, and a lot of people finished the quilt. And again, it was very labor intensive, but it was such a blast. It was a great project to do during the summer. It taught me a ton about working with templates and, just all of that. It was just such a blast. But there was a part of me that kind of wished that I would not have done it in Halloween. I wished I would have just done it in regular scrappy fabrics. And, it was always a quote where you think, well, maybe someday I will. But, obviously time goes on. Well, my friend Carol Crago, she sent me all of the blocks that she had done. All of the blocks were not completed. I forget how many I needed. I don't know if I needed like 10 or 12, but I decided to get to work as soon as it came. And I had given away my template set and I didn't want to make a new template. So I sort of cheated. I used some of the leftover quilt blocks from the Civil War Diary quilt. I think there was like 4 or 5. And then out of the Lori Holt books, I picked some of those and I made the 6-inch blocks, which the finished blocks in the quilt are unfinished 6.5 inch. So it was perfect. So I just went and I picked like similar blocks that were in this book, and I created the needed blocks to finish my Farmer's Wife quilt. And I flippin' love it. Again, it's one of the top 5 favorite quilts I've ever made. When Carol's package came and I opened it up and I saw this book laying there and like all of the stack of the blocks, like I was so giddy. Happy dance. I was super thrilled. And I couldn't believe that. I know how much time and effort went into each and every one of those blocks, and I couldn't believe that she gifted it to me. So I definitely set about immediately making that quilt and having it, and I just had a blast. For the Farmer's Wife Sampler quilt, once I completed it, I did quilt it with an all over meandering quilt motif. It's a humongous quilt. And in fact, as I was working on it, I thought it would fit here. I don't know what I was thinking. But so for the original Halloween quilt I made, I put blocks in between. So I made it like a king size. This one, it was made, like the quilt that's on the back. So it's quite a bit smaller than my king size version. I would bring it out here to show, but it's starting to fall apart. And eventually, like I said, I'll probably make cutter block or, do other things with the blocks, the ones that are salvageable. The fabrics I use came from like Joann's. And so a lot of those fabrics that I purchased from Joann's are the ones that are falling apart because this quilt was on our bed. I washed it a whole bunch. Yeah, it's falling apart. This one is not allowed to be on my bed. It's not allowed to be used other than by me. But I put the quilt together like this, and I thought I would be able to fit it behind me, but it's too wide. So someday, when I build my mansion after I've won the lottery, one whole wall will be dedicated to this quilt. Again, I quilted it with an all over meandering motif. It stays out year round. I love it. You can find this quilt a lot of times, you know, especially on my quilt ladder that's across the room. You will find it folded up there. Sometimes I will, when I'm making my floss tube videos and I need to photograph the cross stitch I've been working on, this is the quilt that will be in the background of the video, or the background of the photo. I love it. Definitely top 5 favorite quilts of all time. I love it. I treasure it. I love it. I'm so very grateful that Carol sent it to me and entrusted me with all of her hard work and her blocks. I don't remember how far I had it assembled before I realized I would need to create more blocks for it, but I think that as I was putting it together on the diagonal, the bottom right side, all of those blocks are Lori Holt blocks. But all Civil War reproduction fabrics, all scrappy, all beautiful, lovely, wonderful. Love it. If you're looking for a challenge, highly recommend. Now, for this next quilt, this one is probably the one that I get asked the most questions. It comes out of the book Tried and True by Jo Morton, which I don't know if you guys have heard. If you're Jo Morton fans, she has a fabric line coming out in March of next year. So she was retired. So I don't know if this means she's coming out of retirement and she's going to start releasing new fabric, or if it was just kind of like a one-time deal with the fabric company. All I know is I'm ecstatic. It's called Carolina. It's gorgeous. And I cannot wait for it to come out. I am going to buy it. So I just need to save up, because I would imagine a fat quarter bundle is going to cost me a pretty penny. So I need to like save up, sell something, whatever it takes to get those fabrics, because it's a beautiful, like Jo Morton. It's one of my favorite designers. I was super sad when she retired, but I totally understood. But she's a designer that I 100% wish that I could go back to Olivia back 20 years ago and say, don't listen to this lady. This is what I'm going to show you, what you're going to miss. So it comes out of the book Tried and True by Jo Morton, and it is called Cut the Mustard. So love this quilt so much. It was such a fun project to put together. I collected indigos and cheddars from a local quilt shop called the Speckled Hen in Aurora, Oregon. I had a gift certificate that my husband had given me for my birthday that year, or birthday money. I can't remember which one I did. So I know I got a gift certificate, and then I know I had birthday money, but either I used the gift certificate for the fabrics or I used it for the Jane Austen quilt. But I just remember at the same time I made that purchase, and I just had to wait for my Jane Austen quilt. But I went to my local quilt shop, Speckled Hen, Aurora, Oregon, and I bought indigo and cheddar fabrics. And I spent a very happy couple of weeks assembling these blocks and creating this quilt. Some of the fabrics used are Jo Morton fabrics, and it ended up kind of being a happy accident that I ended up purchasing those from the local quilt shop. She did. I haven't been there in like 2 years, and she's not even that far away from me. But she, at the time, had a lot of older fabric lines, and so there's a couple of quilts that I was actually able to purchase, like the border fabric, even though the border fabric had been out of print for like 10 years. So, you know, finding those Jo Morton prints it was just happy accident, and I loved it. So all in all, this was one fabulous fun quilt to put together. It's one that I usually will hang up after Christmas, kind of when it's those dark, dreary days of January. I even occasionally will have it hanging up in November because it just vibes really well with the Thanksgiving decor. I tend to prefer everything to be a little bit more like dark and dirty than bright. So it's a quilt that plays very well in different seasons. And again, it's one that is left out year round. I love it. It's also another one that you sometimes can find in the background of cross-stitch pictures, or even on the quilt ladder, or hanging from a quilt display. I mean, it's definitely one that plays very well with a variety of holidays and seasons. So it's one that gets left out year round, and I absolutely love it. I am not sure the status of this book. Um, I don't know if you can still purchase it new, but you definitely can get it on the secondary market. I can't remember which publisher went out of business, whether it was Martingale, which I think it was, or the other one. But I know this is still available on the secondary market. And from what I remember, Cut the Mustard was available in another book. Because when I was putting it together, there was a lady who had contacted me and said that you can also find the quilt in this other book, and I just don't remember what it was. Because I even think I have the book. I should go, I'll look and see if I can find it. If I can, I will put both books, but definitely you can get it tried and true. And there's a lot of other wonderful quilts in this book. So far, I've made two. So I made Cut the Mustard, and then I made a Christmas quilt that is a wall hanging that hangs up during December called Glad Tidings. And this one, you'll see when I get my Christmas decor out, I'll do a Christmas quilt video. And this is one of them. For my last quilt, it's not one that has an official name. It was, so how it went is I think we were watching Carol Saltbox Stitcher. And behind her in this particular floss tube video that she had done, she had this star quilt hanging up behind her. So we decided we were going to create the quilt. I think that's how it went. I'm pretty positive it was her video, because anytime you watch Carol's videos, you always get inspired to create all the things. So we decided to create blocks. We were going to do an exchange, which we did. And then we would, with our stash, we would create the remaining blocks and then create a throw. So I started off using a pattern by Lori Holt. It came in either Farm Girl Vintage 1 or 2. I can't remember which one of the books I had got the star pattern from. But then after I got like 4 or 5 blocks in, I ended up finding a pattern by Kathleen Tracy, which if you belong to her Facebook group, Kathleen Tracy Quilts, you can get the PDF file from her group files. And so that's what I ended up using for the remaining blocks, because it was the same size and it was just kind of easier to have that piece of paper as a reference versus a book that I kept having to move around. So this quilt, again, all scrappy. It's another one that gets left up year round. It gets moved around the house depending on the seasons. I also do use it in the background of photographs for Instagram. I do occasionally use it to cover up with in the morning when it's chilly. The motif that I used on this, no surprise, is a very simple ribbon motif. Again, it's just an overall meandering that I then go back and shadow. For the Scrappy Stars quilt, I will put a link. First, I will link the book that I originally started making the blocks from. It was a Lori Holt book. I just don't remember which one it was. I feel like Lori Holt books are a great resource to have. I mean, that's how I was able to complete my Farmer's Wife quilt. I just went and I looked at the block that was needed and I was able to substitute it using her books. And so they're just a great resource, great books to have for your library. And then I will also put a link to Kathleen Tracy's Facebook group. If you want to join, I think you have to answer a couple of questions, but it's a wonderful group to belong to. Another great resource, because she also does have free patterns up in the file section, which is where you will find Scrappy Stars. I'm pretty sure that is the name of the quilt pattern, with Scrappy Stars. I just don't remember. It's been too many years ago. Well, honestly, it hasn't been that many years, but I mean, I don't remember things as well as I used to. Well, friends, that brings me to the end of today's video. I got a low storage warning on my phone, and so I panicked and went and deleted things to make room, and I ended up deleting all of the videos. Luckily, I was able to restore them. So now I get the fun task of going through each and every single one of them and finding out which is the one I decided to keep and which is the one I decided to delete. So that means it's time for me to go. However, if you've stuck around for this length of time, thank you so very much. I do greatly appreciate it. I had a blast making today's video and I hope you enjoyed it too. I do plan on being back in 4 weeks. I will have all of the Halloween quilts out, and so I am just dying to show you guys all of those. And I can't wait because Halloween is my favorite time of the year. And basically, autumn is my favorite time of the year, but Halloween especially. So I'm super excited to share all those quilts with you. And of course, I will have my #1 favorite quilt that I will get to show. So it's always a fun time of year when Hocus Pocusville makes its appearance. So I can't wait to make that video. It'll probably be a little on the long side because I do have quite a few Halloween quilts to talk about. And so I hope you will come back and, check those out. If you would like to see what I'm up to in between my videos, you can follow me on Instagram. I'm Pumpkin Hollow Quilts, or I do have a Facebook page called Pumpkin Hollow Quilting, and I will put a link to both of those pages or places down below, as well as all of the quilts that I have shown and shared in today's video. Whatever information I can find out about them will also be listed down below in the description box. Thank you so very much for stopping by. I so appreciate it so much, and I hope you have a wonderful 4 weeks until we meet again. Bye.